The fifth session which I checked out was called Return on Investment Driven Observability by Michael Hausenblas. And he opened by talking about a common pattern in organizations where we have monolithic applications which contain a lot of services. We have a strategy to decouple those services to help in many different ways, and we break those into microservices. But by breaking them down into microservices, we now have a distributed system, and all those components need to communicate with each other, and there's a lot more complexity, which makes it much more challenging to observe, to have observability about what's going on. But within this new level of complexity, observability is now incredibly compulsory to get it right. So having this observability strategy is something which we need to do once we have these complex distributed microservices solutions. So talking about the return on investment, he was talking about what are the investments that we make? Is it our sources of data and the agents we install and the licensing fees or whatever, the different destinations that we send our data, and all of the costs associated with people and infrastructure and software fees. Also the runtime overhead of running our observability tooling. And also the cost of storage for logs and for metrics. And then, well, what's the return on the investment we get? Is it faster iterations, delivery? Is it less resource usage? Particularly helpful in the context of cloud, where that can literally mean savings of thousands and thousands of dollars. Or maybe a return is faster recovery after incidents. And of course, ultimately, we're all looking for happier customers. He also, another point I liked was around buy versus build in terms of your observability. But if you build using open source standards, you are ultimately more flexible about what you can do and how you change and adjust in the future. The last thing that really stood out for me was he mentioned some different signal types, and I've heard often we hear about logs, metrics, and traces. We always hear about those. He also mentioned profiles, which I hadn't really heard about. I mean, I've kind of heard of the term profiling before, but he mentioned this thing called profiles, and he defined it as resource usage in the context of code execution. And that's a new idea for me in the world of observability. And he mentioned it's an emerging open source landscape around where we store that data. So that's really interesting. Again, it was a very well professionally put together talk, and I highly recommend it.